Welcome, Reanimated fans, to this week's episode. I'm H.A. Conrad, and here, as always, is my intrepid and tolerant companion, Stuart Tiffin. Hello,
What's
Stuart.
up? Hi, how you doing? Tolerant? I don't
Tolerant,
know.
not
I don't know.
intolerant, tolerant.
Either way, I'm not sure what I've done to deserve that, but hi.
Hi. So today we're going to be talking about the next couple of episodes in Fear the Walking Dead, episodes 5 and 6. Oh, wait, sorry. Yes, Laura and Just in Case. Mm-hmm. And ahead of that, we have a couple of news items, some actually interesting ones that tie into each other. Which one did you want to kick off with? I mean, I think they're both valid and interesting to talk about, so.
Yeah, let's start with the anniversary.
So this week, or this past week rather, marks the anniversary of the release of one of our favorite films, which kicked off a whole subgenre, 28 Days Later. And this is interesting for a variety of reasons. One is that Danny Boyle, who is the director, never really considered at the time, and I don't even know if now considers this to be a zombie film, but most everybody does. You and I have had talks about this. I think it's definitely a contagion film versus a zombie film, but I can see how people came to this conclusion. Maybe it's more of a reimagining of the genre, but in any case, without this, we wouldn't have a lot of the things that we see today, including The Walking Dead. So, I think there's a couple of articles that we're linking to. One has kind of a faulty URL, but it does indeed link to this. But a little bit more of a comprehensive look back is the one on Slash Film, which talks ad nauseum about this. If you haven't seen this yet, see it. But it makes me want to watch it again, quite honestly.
Yeah, though our archive of podcasts has kind of gotten wonky in over the years and starts at 74 right now, which really frustrates me. We did like a 2-hour podcast about 28 Days Later.
Longer than the actual film.
Yeah, it was. God, we did not shut up about that movie. And that was in the first year of our podcast. So sometime in the early, I don't know, teens maybe of our pod. And you can see it or you can listen to it on our website in the archives at reanimatedpodcast.com if you care to go back into the early days, back when we were just kids, really. Just kids making a podcast.
Yeah. A couple crazy kids podcasting. And one of the things that we had talked about, and it's interesting because Kirkman has talked about this as well, there's obvious similarities between the setup of The Walking Dead in the original comics, in the show, with Rick Grimes awaking in this hospital. Nobody's around. He's awaking from a coma or a coma-like state. And many people have drawn parallels between that and 28 Days Later. And Kirkman, to this day, says that it is a coincidence that, 28 Days Later came out in June of 2003, and this issue came out in, I think, October of 2003. So maybe it was in the either, maybe, through some subconscious place this came and happened to him, but I feel like there's got to be a little bit of something overlapping there. Mm-hmm. And thus launched the genre. I mean, we're in 2018 now. We've got The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead and so many other content that came out of this. So I say we give it its due. And speaking of some coincidences or similarities, apparently most recently Kirkman and a few other people have been named in a Fear the Walking Dead lawsuit, which is claiming that they lifted the second season storyline from another graphic novel or story called what was it, Dead Ahead, yeah, which I've never read, but honestly, of all the seasons of Fear the Walking Dead, that's like that was the one that makes the least amount of sense. So They should probably just cut the guy a check and be like, yeah, that was our bad. Yeah. We don't want to take credit for this season. It was kind of a hot garbage fire. So you can have that one back. Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of a bit of the news right now. Anything to add before we hop into our reviews?
Negative. I'm just super pumped to be on the show.
Me too. We're going to be talking about the episodes I mentioned at the top of the episode, Laura, and Just in Case. And I have to say, Laura is probably my favorite episode out of this season at this point.
I'd call these a couple of a good duo, frankly.
Yeah, definitely a good duo. Certainly focused on the character of Naomi, but also John. And so we get a little bit of the backstory. We've had hints of this up until this point. But they're definitely giving us a lot more background more background than we've seen of these characters. We've only had like sort of little tidbits and ideas about it up until this point. So, although I will say John doesn't get any less comic booky / tropey. Like, he's kind of the same dude, although we do add a little bit more to his backstory.
Yeah, and this one was Laura was directed by Michael Satrazemis, who's an executive producer on the show and has been, as I've mentioned, a long time, at least with Fear the Walking Dead involved, and written by Anna Fishko. And it had an audience of 2.46 million, which is creeping down from the 4 million they had at the season premiere and 10 million that they had at the series premiere. But hey, nobody talks about the 10 million anymore. But yeah, it's a great story. It's a great little compact story, and I think most TV shows tend to, I don't know, you like tap a well of performance and creativity when you shrink everything else down.
And do a little bottle episode. We get to see what John's life was like. This is post infection, post sort of world coming to an end. Again, always tough to tell a little bit with the timeline, but he has certainly figured out his way to survive. So he's in this little cabin on an island or something like an island. He has definitely figured out a way to deal with the infected, washing up on his little shore of his cabin. So he's basically placed a lot of things in the way so that he can handle this.
I just love his whole setup, man. He's got not only does he have that really little moat, but he also has he's got a wind generator.
And he's also got he's got the water purifier that and all that stuff. I mean,
he's 100% off the grid, and you get the impression that he was before the apocalypse. I mean, he was. That kind of comes out with his story. Mm-hmm. He really wanted to get away from people after he had like an accidental shooting or whatever. And so now he's in this perfect scenario, and it's kind of a bummer that he ever had to leave it. But it's also very small. So
it's small, but it's also, he is able to sort of go about his day. But the interesting thing about him is that nothing has really changed for him other than the fact that there are infected and that there are no people around. And it's an interesting examination because while he was trying to get away from people, clearly he's very lonely. And still continues to do these honorable things and moral things that you would expect from this character. He is unwavering in terms of what he has done, and some of that you find out later in the episode is because of things that happened while there were still people around and a little bit at the beginning of all of this.
There are definitely some parallels you can draw from this episode to I Am Legend based on the Will Smith character in that film and his solitude. He at least has the dog. But they both watch a lot of movies. They both have like a set schedule and way that they do things. What with alarm clocks waking them up. Why do you need an alarm clock to wake you up in the apocalypse? And the fact that he's just lying there staring at the ceiling anyway when his alarm goes off the first time. But there are these parallels of like, oh, I go to this video store and check out movies, and I play Scrabble against myself. So there were some shades of that. It didn't go on too far, other than in like defining this solitary lifestyle.
Right, and I should also mention he's also writing reviews of the movies as well on the little sheet. Yeah. It's like too violent, love this one, all that kind of thing. Yeah. And it is also an ingenious way of using one of those like big mouth bass. A weird music alarm clocks, which I thought was pretty funny. But, they show a little bit of how lonely he is. And that segues very nicely into when he finds Naomi. And he initially thinks that she's another infected and quickly realizes that she's actually human and like has not been infected, but has been hurt pretty badly. And it also sets up her character very well, as always, as a skeptic, very much a survivalist, does not really want to be around people and does not trust people, which we saw from the get-go from her initial interactions with.
That's pretty consistent.
So for both of these characters, it's interesting to see them come together. And he takes care of her. He helps her with her wound, which is pretty nasty. And it also shows his knowledge of what the infected are and how the infection is and the virus is transmitted, because basically sees that it's a cut rather than a bite and says that to her, and he brings her into his world definitely reluctantly. Like, she is always trying to get away, and he's just kind of like, okay, go away, and it actually reminds me a little bit of where, not quite in the same headspace, but when Morgan is doing his whole montage of learning his new way of living. This reminds me a little bit of that, because John is teaching Naomi a different way to live in this world. She is absolutely resistant to it, because she's constantly talking about leaving. She doesn't want to do some of the things that he is suggesting, namely, one of the big sort of symbols of this is the boots that he puts out for her, which, by the way, I'd be putting those things on toot sweet in that swamp area that they're living in. But she doesn't want to deal with them because she always wants to run away. And
yeah, her obsession with like little ASIC running shoes or whatever they are comes back the next episode too, because she's wearing them again, even though she'd obviously left in some good boots at the end of this episode.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but at the beginning, when we first met his character and he started talking about like, oh, I used to watch a lot of movies and eat a lot of popcorn and he's got candy, I was like, oh, this guy was holed up in a movie theater. What a great idea. Yep. But then obviously I was way off.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say that was at least one direction that I thought that they were trying to go with this character. But no,
so did I. I did too.
We get a little bit of a view into why he is such a good shot, as well as an amazing shooting scene. Cool. In this episode that was just, maybe it's just like not that fancy, but I thought it was pretty cool, because he's like a Wild Bill type. Buffalo Bill. No, which is the one who's not the guy who skins ladies? Wild Bill, right?
Well, there actually was both of those. So, but
yes, but one of them is
Hickok,
in Silence of the Lambs.
Well, yes. Wild, and then ended up on Monk, which I think that's why they make him wear that actor make a mustache, because I think he's too identifiable. Yeah. But no, Wild Bill Hickok, I think, is what you're looking for.
Either way, he was doing these trick shot shows on weekends. It's not clear if he was still doing that after he moved out to this cabin. I'm guessing not, but he still has his skills and his two shiny revolvers.
Yep. And, there's a little bit of a battle between these two about taking care of yourself. And he is very reluctant to use these guns. And she is equally angry about that and just doesn't get it, why he would be doing that. And, both of them have backstories where they are traumatized and hurt. For him, it turns out that he shot a kid, like when he was a police officer. And, on the other hand, I understand where he's coming from, because one of the reasons, in addition to whatever trauma he has undergone, basically... I don't think he
shot a child.
Not a child, like a guy, I thought it was a teenager, but maybe not.
Shot a guy who was robbing a gas station.
Yep. But he basically says multiple times, like, if I use these guns, it's going to, attract many more of these things. Mm-hmm. So he already knows that. But it's, I will say that the scenario that they're all this comes out is because more and more infected keep getting washed up onto his cabin shore, and they basically go to find out what's happening, and this gets them out, and you see a little bit more and reveal a little bit more about why he's holed up. So some of these stories come out, but they go upstream and find a guardrail on a bridge that has been broken, so they're all the infected are all kind of falling into this water. I feel like this is a little unlikely personally, but because it's like we've seen.
The answer is so clear that they just need to break the window of that car and kill the zombie that's in the car that makes the thumping sound that attracts zombies to go over the edge, then they fall in the water.
Yeah.
Why they didn't think of that the second time they were patching up the hole in the fence, I don't know, but that's clearly what has to happen.
Right, because it's the noise that's attracting them. And so I'm kind of like, you guys are so smart about other things and can't figure this out. But hey, okay. But they go into the town, and we hear a little bit how, he's not sure where the owner of this store is. She does something where she reveals that she was a nurse, because she's organizing the medical supplies. And then, this is a really well laid out episode in that they're slowly revealing things to each other. And there's some trust that has built between them, although he just seems to be so happy to have a human. He doesn't, his trust is there from the get-go. She is much more reluctant, but eventually reveals that she lost her kid. And that
scene was really nice. I mean, it felt real. Like he's like passed out, and she just looks over and says it, and then walks away, and he nods, and I'm like, man, yeah. And that, you don't really have to explain anything else for her. I mean, we get a lot more in the next episode, but that's it. Like, you're like, okay, I get it. You are a mess. You've got a long way to go.
Right. And they continue to bond in all of this. And then, the big, set piece of this episode, which is, obviously their patchwork on the bridge doesn't work because of the thumping thing. And, they are basically overrun by a bunch of infected. And it's kind of a cool thing because you see how all of his plans in place have been kind of like building up to this point. And then the scene that you referred to earlier where he just takes out all of them all at once, as she's about to be bitten by them.
They were really coming from every side, which also undermines his defensive stuff. But he also does this thing where he jumps into the ditch, which I didn't understand why he would ever get into the moat. Yeah. Because once he does, he gives up. He's using an axe, and he gives up his height advantage, and then they're right up on him, and he has to spend all of his time pushing them away. But whatever. And she picks up a shovel, and she's not doing much with it. It seemed like she was kind of just standing around. Mm-hmm. I think she hit one zombie with a shovel, and then you see them coming from every direction. And then when she falls in the ditch, you're like, oh my gosh, she's just covered in zombies. How's she going to live? But we know that she does because we've seen her in future scenes. But yeah. I really enjoyed this episode, but I don't feel like there's a whole lot more to talk about it, honestly.
Well, I mean, I guess the motivation for her leaving is still a little bit weird to me because, I mean, so she lost her kid. What else is there for her out there? I don't really understand why she would leave other than maybe she doesn't like being attached to somebody and is afraid of losing them. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But I just don't really like it's hard to imagine somebody who has been through as much as she has been finds this happy oasis, finds somebody that she cares about, and would actually leave. But that's what happens. And I guess there wouldn't be a storyline for either of these characters if she didn't. Right. But
I just think she thinks she's the jinx, like it's kind of like the Morgan thing. I lose people, then I lose myself. And she's like, well, when I'm around, entire settlements get eaten. Right. So I think she's because she does admit that she cares for him through Scrabble.
Which I thought was actually a pretty nice touch too. So she was like, "I love you too," and we see this later because he kind of carries around this little Scrabble message with him all the time. But I loved this episode, and definitely ranks as my number one for this season. Yeah, it's a strong episode, but the better the episode, the less I want to tear it to pieces. So. True. No, I loved it. I loved it. I thought it was great. And also, I would say a nice little, it's a good sort of, as we have framed it in the past, it's a good little grocery store shopping happy piece, like from 28 Days Later. Like you get a little bit of a respite from the bleakness of the rest of the
shopping
world.
Montage in the rest of the horror. Mm-hmm. And it's a good episode, and it continues to underline Naomi, Laura, Jenna Elfman's character's capability. Like she does not shy away from putting down walkers too, which is a good thing to know. I mean, I guess at this point in the apocalypse, is anybody? I mean, they're playing with this idea that Nick is now incapable of defending himself in the wild, but or was, because RIP. But yeah, it's nice to see a character who's just like, oh, there's a walker over there. Okay, I got this one, and just walks up and puts it down when they're on the bridge. I mean, there's that one scene, but I don't know. I just, even though that's like a scene that probably nobody even has to think too hard about, but I think you have a look on John's face after she kills it where he's like smiling, like, all right, yeah, she's a good one. She's a keeper.
Yep. But that leads into the next episode, which also is a very strong episode. So Just in Case, which is directed by Daisy von Schurler-Meyer and written by Richard Nang. And this actually also dropped down a little bit. So 2.31 million viewers of this. And so basically this is now back in the stadium with the Stadium Group, and they have decided to basically replant and for seeds and fertilizer, so get over the whole weevil issue that they've had, and hope to survive. And there's a lot of stuff going on in this episode. There is some confessional things between Strand and Madison, and then also with Naomi. And so I kind of think this is a bit of a confessional episode overall, between these groups, between these groups of people, giving them a little bit of a better understanding of each other. And we find out a lot more about Naomi's backstory in this episode. And she is the one who lets them know that there is a FEMA shelter with all of these things that they need. And it's kind of far out. But she's also intending to run. So initially she was intending to run. She was going to give them a map of where it was, and she was going to pull the same disappearing act that she pulled on John. And, you know, I think the stuff between Madison and Strand is very interesting because he does confess to her that he has a plan. He had, like, not just come across that truck full of supplies. And it's very interesting because the thing that the repeated phrase that keeps happening throughout this entire season is, "I know who you are," and that is said like multiple times between Madison and Strand, between Strand and Naomi, I think, or Alicia and Naomi. So, and John says this to Naomi too, I think. And it's also said to Morgan. So if they're trying to have a theme, tie all this stuff together, I think that's one of them. And so that's an examination. Who are you in this new world? Like, who are you really? So, you know, and it's also kind of a weird thing because one of the things that we talk about is like, look, in this world, like when you're betrayed by a character, and this includes like Charlie, the little girl, it includes Strand, it includes Naomi. I mean, how far does that trust run when somebody betrays you? Because betrayal in this world means you could die. So I kind of feel like, if anything, one of the weaknesses is that I don't know that they would fully trust characters to the level that they do in some of these situations, just because they've shown their true colors. So keep saying, "I know you who you are," doesn't necessarily cut it unless you're seeing some kind of, I don't know, support of whoever that person is. Thoughts on this?
Well, that's true. I don't think that you really have much choice because there's only a few humans left. And really, the worst thing that Laura has done over and over again is just try to leave. True. I mean, while they do pull a gun on her at the beginning of the episode, I feel like it's really just, yeah, the gate guard lady's being a little overzealous, but it's also like, what if she's stealing supplies and they are really low on supplies? So that I can see that. And the Strand part, you're right not to trust Strand. I mean, I think Madison does for whatever reason, but Strand is he has been a double crosser, double dealer the entire time we've known him on the show. They tried to show that he still has that inclination in the last episode, but for the most part, he's a house cat now. He's been brought back in. I don't really like the way that, we've talked about how his character is basically stripped of most of its coolness, and his declaration to Madison in this episode where he's like, "I think you should have left me in that stream or left me to die," which, by the way, it's another partial description of how they all got back together. She had apparently saved her 2 children and put them in a cave, and then saved Strand, and then went and found Luciana. It's almost like something you'd read in the Bible. I don't even understand how they're gonna be like, yeah, this is how this happened. It was cave stuff, and Madison saved everybody. I'm just like, fine, okay. Don't ever show us how it all actually happened, because
it's like
you're not gonna make it cool anyway.
Right. It's a weird way to reveal it, though. I admit to you, I was truly relieved they didn't do yet another freaking flashback. To do that, but I agree, it's almost like trying to fill in these character pieces and storylines without actually showing it, and the odd decision to sort of play out the story in this way feels a little clunky to me. But I feel like that understanding that she and Strand have between each other is less believable because you're not seeing those kinds of story pieces, those pieces of the story revealed in that way. Putting it into dialogue is strange, but okay. So
when you put it in the context of last season, where they didn't really spend that much time together, they left him at the hotel, and the next time they see him, it's when they're like at the dam or taking over the dam. I forget exactly how they all got thrown back into together, but it was with the Black Hats and Walker and those folks. But the dude is basically not trustworthy. So whether
but yet, well, remember, before the dam even, Madison rescues Strand and gives all their supplies in order to rescue from being in that like weird little.
Oh God, yeah,
the
other diamond, yeah.
Right, so she's like constantly, like basically saying, "Okay, I'm gonna like leverage everything to save Strand, even though he just keeps betraying us."
That
but
was
I
not
know
even
who
her
he is.
Stuff to leverage. That was that was Walker's stuff. That was another weird thing.
Yeah, but I know who he is.
She's gone out on a limb for him a number of times, but now for him to suddenly have this like, "I'm not worthy. I'm a bad person. You should let me die." I'm like, oh God, come on. Yeah, honestly, this half season has been such a downer in terms of taking characters and just making them either doubt themselves or just evil. And we see that again at the end of this episode with Alicia. And unfortunately, Alicia is basically stuck in this mode in the flash forwards in the present day. It just sucks. It's like there's no joy left in her. She was the lighthearted one.
Right.
Not that she was making jokes, but she was like, the nurse. She was the one who was supposed to be counteracting the darkness inside Madison and Nick. She was the balancing out with Travis, and when they were a quartet, it was Travis and Alicia as like the positive characters versus the other two who were more drawn to the darkness. And now we don't even have that in Alicia, which is a big bummer.
But on the positive side, we have the story of Naomi, and I do think that some of this is very interesting with showing where she came from and why she is the way she is. So, she gets tracked by Madison and Strand, and they are going to do their supply run, and we do see like she takes off. She leaves them together in the hotel or motel and goes off on her own to the shelter, and she does some clever stuff, like she distracts the walkers by just like attracting them to the glass of the shelter, and then goes around the back. We see just sort of the story laid out in how she's walking through. You can definitely tell that her daughter was clearly there. She's looking around. She's having a little bit of PTSD flashback going on, and then ultimately has a bit of a meltdown because she freaks out, makes noise. She finds the keys she's looking for, which say JIC, just in case, and talks about, and she's talked about like the woman that helped her sort of plan and everything, and then reveals her full story to Strand and Madison. And it's a pretty sad and weird story. I feel like this story has some holes in it, though, I kind of get it, but basically her daughter was sick with pneumonia. She goes off to find antibiotics. When she gets back, and she didn't tell anybody that her daughter was sick, and kind of like hid her, I guess. And her daughter apparently is the one that infected everybody, which that would be a lot, right? Like, I just don't know.
It would be hard, yeah. If with one vector, it would be pretty crazy to imagine that an entire community would get taken down by one child zombie and whoever she was biting. True.
Right. So that bothered me a bit, but whatever. That's what the story they're telling, and they're sticking to it. And so she's this is her whole thing, why she feels like she doesn't deserve to be around people, yet keeps being drawn back in, why she probably left John. And she gets rescued by Madison and Strand because she just kind of gets frozen and is stuck in this scaffolding thing. And they rescue her, have an understanding with all of each other, and find the big truck, which has all the supplies that they need, which had been loaded up by this woman that had trained Naomi. And
there's parts about this set piece that I really liked, which is why I thought this was a good episode to go along with Laura. Such as, well, I was terrified that we were going to see a lot of kid zombies, especially when she walks in like the kid area, and you're like looking at not only cribs with bottles, you're looking at like the coloring station. We know that she lost a child, right? And so this is probably where it happened, even before we get all the exposition. And I was maybe a little bit disappointed. That sounds terrible, but like she freaks out when she sees a bloodstain on the closet door where she had hidden her daughter. We find that out later, but there's just like, stain there, and there's a dead body in front of it, or two. Like somehow her daughter managed to kill two grown people before, then everybody. So I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get to see her daughter as a zombie. That's terrible, I know, but...
Yeah, but I feel like they tried to handle enough of that, in that it was very clear that she knew all the people in the shelter.
Yes, and they did a great job of showing that. She couldn't shoot any of them, and they did some slow motions, even though we don't know who they are. That's us seeing through her eyes, and that was well done, I thought, too. However, where is Daughter Zombie Rose? Why aren't we seeing her? I'm glad we didn't, in a way, but on the flip side, it's like, if she's freaking out just because she sees a bloodstain, she's going to go catatonic and like not be able to function if she sees Rose. And I don't know, maybe we should have gone there.
I thought that's where they were going, and I was very surprised that they didn't. So I don't know, maybe she ended up already taking out her daughter, who knows. But
there was also a giant wall of MREs in that front room that I don't think I saw any of those on the truck when they got back to the...
Nope.
And at that point they'd locked all the zombies in the gym. Like, there was nothing to stop them from just stripping that place clear, which was also a cool part of this episode, is seeing how the vultures clear out a site. Like, they took everything, like the light bulbs off the ceiling, the fluorescent light bulb tubes, the bell off the door, like everything gets taken by the vultures. And I feel like they should have probably learned a lesson from the vultures and stripped this place 100%.
Well, and it honestly wouldn't have been that hard. I mean, because they know where all of the walkers are and the infected are. There's a way to do it with just the three of them. They're all very capable, and they certainly could have lured them and done this. And
that truck could have been loaded higher than it was.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and the gym scene I thought was funny because they basically outsmarted the walkers with like a high wire trick, whatever. I've seen that a few times in this show, and it's like, okay, but it was a little bit far-fetched the way they made that work. But the walkers were essentially defeated by their inability to go under the bottom bunk or over the bottom bunk.
Yeah.
Like, blocking people with bunk beds. These are, I mean, in the pilot of The Walking Dead Prime, we watched them crawl under a tank to get to Rick, right? They know how to crawl under things. They know how to go under things, people. Bunk beds are not really a very good
they aren't
deterrent.
They're not a good barrier. But you know, I'd also like to talk a little bit about the part of this episode that I am just absolutely... This was the part of this episode that drove me absolutely bonkers.
The finale?
No, not the finale. I mean, initially. So, Morgan runs into, like, one of the vultures and basically Morgan knows enough about human nature. He's had enough dealings with all of these disparate groups. He gets what is happening here. Yet somehow he knows what's going on with this group of vultures. He knows where they kind of sit in the echelon of groups that you've seen out here in the apocalypse. Yet tells them not to go gives them basically a heads up that Alicia and her group are going to go there, like, to tell them to stay safe. Why would they need to say this is the group that has the upper hand? I'm just I was just, even when it was happening, I'm like, this is not something I believe that Morgan would do. I just don't buy it. And unfortunately, that's what they made him do, and that's how we get the whole standoff between the Vultures and Alicia, Strand, Luciana, and with Mel just kind of being like, oh, thanks for giving us the tip-off. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. I don't know. I was definitely annoyed and angry about this.
Yeah, it's an annoying thing that he would do, but it's not 100% not in line with his philosophy, at least.
I guess so, but whatevs. It was just bullshit, in my opinion. But anyway, that's
and it backfires, and maybe he'll learn a lesson from that, or maybe not.
And he looks totally surprised, like, oh my gosh, they showed up with a bunch of people to like confront them, and so there's a big standoff, and obviously the big reveal is that Naomi is still alive, and she is with the Vultures, and that Alicia like loses her like for real shit, like, and just absolute betrayal when it's Naomi when you hear her over the radio.
I mean, I don't know that this is betrayal. I mean, it is, because they obviously have some beef beyond what we know with the Vultures. There's nothing to really explain why they're this pissed off at the Vultures so far. We don't know, other than they used to have a whole camp, and now they don't. And people didn't get out of the settlement.
And sure. Nick is dead.
However, Nick is dead, but he did that himself.
Kind of, but that's not in Alicia's eyes, and we still haven't seen Madison, so you kind of know something must have happened.
However, Naomi shows up. There are, I would guess, a dozen different explanations for why she's hooked up with the Vultures, one of which is just that she needed somebody to hang out with, and Nick and Strand and Alicia and Luciana were just out in the wind somewhere and weren't able, like there are other explanations that do not require a bullet. But obviously this is part of my reasoning for just being depressed about this show and the direction they're taking our quote unquote heroes.
Yep.
Is that Alicia's going to shoot someone when she doesn't even know the story.
Yeah. And I don't buy that either. So, but
and she shoots the wrong person too, which is just like adding insult to injury.
Yeah, and she shoots, of all people, John, who is both elated but also freaked out by this whole scenario because he's so happy that Naomi's alive, and he's shot.
Given his guns to Morgan, so there's not going to be any trick shooting today, folks.
Nope. And so, understandably, he steps in the way. He's going to protect Naomi. Good guy, as always. And it's interesting because it feels like a very similar shot to when Nick got shot. So you think he's done for. Mm-hmm. So I think that pretty much wraps up this episode.
Yeah. And like I said, I did actually enjoy them, even though I sound pretty negative about Just In Case. I really like the set piece with the FEMA center. It makes you wonder how many more of these are out there in the zombie apocalypse world. And I like this episode. I'm just disappointed with the way that the showrunners have decided to take the quartet of hero characters, leaving John and Morgan and maybe Naomi as these and Al potentially. But Al's also she's really embracing the camera thing, right? Like she was not.
Oh, yeah.
John asks her for a little help, and she just looks at him and continues filming. And you're like, wait, Al has already saved them from kind of a scenario not unlike this before. Why? But suddenly she's like, "Oh, my journalistic integrity doesn't allow me to get out from behind the camera."
Yeah, and they keep using this. They keep using this, and it's super annoying. And it's one of the things I just dislike completely about this character. And again, do not find it believable in any way. So it's just an unlikely thing that she would be saying that. So I don't know. It's
another frustrating element of this of their use of the various characters. But yeah.
And then the other thing that I find completely unlikely is that the Vultures would just turn tail and run just because they got seeds and fertilizer and stuff. It takes a really long time for plants to grow. They don't seem like a group that would give up so quickly, though. Again, this turns out to be a bit of a false. Obviously, they're trying to sort of work the system a bit here and give them false hope. But I agree. I don't mean to be sounding... I think I was very positive about the FEMA piece of this episode, less positive about the end result and the end standoff between the Vultures and the group in the present day.
I thought Nick made a good argument that they've stripped, everything for 50 Mile Circle around the diamond. They've been staying there too, sending people out, but everything around there is gone. Like they're probably, and he's right, they're probably running out of food, and so I get it. I believe that. I think that they would probably pick up and go, especially now that it seems like the settlement has another chance. I mean, they might have waited a couple more days to see if it was for real, but they don't have eyes inside anymore. They don't have that ability to know what's going on. So
True.
Yeah, move on, find something, like drive 50 miles further down the road and start strip malls again.
Again, though, all the energy that it takes to do this, as opposed to maybe, say, set up in a FEMA shelter like the one that we saw.
Yeah.
And I will, just to circle back to something you said about the FEMA shelters and whether there's more, I do think it would have been an interesting dynamic, and this is why it just seems unlikely that one little kid, Walker, could infect and take over an entire FEMA shelter. Because when you saw who the walkers were in that shelter, and we've seen a little bit of this before or a lot of this in The Walking Dead, you have groups of people that have been trained, they're in fatigues, they have been trained for crisis scenarios and things like that. And it would have been interesting, I think, to see the dynamic of a well-run FEMA shelter that didn't get overrun. I don't know. I just thought that would have been a little bit more interesting to see how one could be successful, right?
Yeah.
And how maybe they would deal with the vultures or these other groups because they're trained to do it in a way that some of these civilians are not. And it's sort of along the same theme that you and I have talked about, which is that, everybody's so like bad in the armed forces, or it just goes badly wrong. And, they always sort of make them out to be either incompetent or the bad guys. But it would be nice to see a group actually successful in one of these little, if they could show it, like a little vignette. Because I would imagine if the vultures tried to do something with trained professionals, like from a FEMA shelter, that wouldn't work out so well.
True.
So.
I think that's a good point. Maybe, there's another half season to go. Maybe we'll get another chance. There's no end of chances to show the military in a light that isn't bad.
Right.
But so far, Fear the Walking Dead has not opted to go that way. So
right.
I will not be holding my breath.
All right. Well, looking forward to talking about the next couple of episodes, it brings us to the mid-season finale, correct?
Yes, it does.
All right.
The Wrong Side of Where You Are Now, and then No One's Gone are the next two episodes. So we'll hit those up next time. And in the meantime, you can get a hold of us. And hey, go check out our 28 Days Later review if you've got a few hours to spare.
If you dare.
If you're doing a really long road trip, download it. So reanimatedpodcast.com. We're on Twitter, reanimatedpcast, and you can email us at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. So give us a holler, leave us a review, and we love you.
Yes. Until next time. Ciao.
Bye.